If it's okay, what I wanted to cover off, and thank you so much for finding time, was obviously just like a little bit about actually like how you got into hotels and through the various progressions you made, and then obviously just also a bit on what your thoughts are, particularly on a distribution landscape, because I feel like that thinking sort of 6 months, 12 months in advance of how people might want to rethink the way they work with distribution partners is really useful. So if I might start off by asking, like, how did you get into hotels, and can you talk a little bit about the career path?
Yeah, by chance, probably is the best way to put it. No, so I've always been in pricing and yield management for most of my career. Started at Maersk, which is a large shipping organization, mainly from many parts of the world, the largest shipping organization in the world. I went to actually Exchange and Rentals, which is RCI, very well known internationally, especially in Europe. Joined there in 2010. So Wyndham Worldwide was 3 different business units: vacation ownership, timeshare exchange, and then hotels. I got my travel bug essentially joining them. And, I saw an opening for revenue manager on the hotel group side, decided to make the pivot. And, I was in revenue management with the franchise for about 2 years, moved over to the managed organization. So more on the, strategic consulting, but then also looking at the bottom line as well. Did that for about 2 years, and then found myself, I did such a great job there with 16 properties. I learned so much about OTAs. I'm like, I can totally do this for 9,000 hotels. A portfolio of 16 compared to 9,000, a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But yeah, no, I joined distribution in 2015 as director, leading the OTAs, negotiations, account management, then took on wholesale, got promoted to senior director, and then ultimately found myself as channel and distribution. So the various aspects of channel, rate, promotions, retailing, competitive intelligence, and then parity optimization was a new pillar that we stood up in the organization. Obviously, you know how important parity is.
Yeah, and having done it at that huge scale,
yeah.
If you were going back to revenue roles at smaller groups or independents, do you think you'd approach it differently, or is it just it's a different beast and they're two quite different skill sets? And
yeah, no, I think it's very similar when you think about it. I mean, we were looking at it, from a 50,000 foot view, but even at a smaller, you're still looking at it the same way, probably through like a different lens is how I would probably approach it. At the end of the day, parity is obviously the most important thing. Knowing your brand value proposition or your hotel's value proposition. That's essentially, having the experience from both a smaller set versus looking at it from a larger set.
Yeah.
It was just a different way to be able to influence. I think if it's a smaller group, you can probably have more influence power versus a larger set. You're dealing with thousands of franchisees essentially, and they're the masters of their own destiny, and we can try to guide them as best as we can. But at the end of the day, all the same concepts are very similar in nature. So, right. That is something that I think I could probably pivot to is a smaller set of hotels if that's, what's dealt in the cards.
Yeah.
Moving forward. But it's the same thing. Everything that we always talk about, whether you're an independent hotel or a branded hotel, the concepts are the same.
Yeah. And so how do you manage when you're at that scale, like defining what how much freedom the franchisees have, each hotel has? Like what were the, okay, here are the constraints that you cannot operate outside of. These are the rules, and we're going to lay them down rigorously. And then here's where you've got room to play.
Yeah, and I can speak to on behalf of like all the different brands, right? So not my previous employer specifically, but there's definitely a balance in terms of the flexibility and the capabilities that the brands are affording the franchisees. Ultimately, you never want to disadvantage anybody in terms of how they make money, but at the same time, I think there's an educational component as it pertains to just the most important items, right? I think my leadership in my previous role was mainly focused on rate parity first and foremost. And not just rate. I think there's, you're going to see an evolution. I feel, especially in the times now, rate, availability, content, is going to be a hugely impactful, if not, it already has been. And then, looking at it from the lens of, just overall value proposition to the guest.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the most important things is, what is that margin of value that you can create for a guest to book on, and through your direct channels. Yeah. For example, if your OTA, and your wholesale is 25% compensation, and, essentially your direct channels, maybe there's some cost to it. Let's just call it 5%. You have 20% to play with.
Yeah.
There in terms of creating value, real tangible value, that the OTAs, are starting to, tap into. You see some of the stuff happening, but essentially, I mean, that's where a lot of my focus was, creating that value and helping the franchisees be able to recognize what that looks like. Not to take anything away from them either. Yeah. And if they want to, piggyback on top of that, there's level up programs that we had for them.
Can you give us some examples of like what kind of, when you say creating value with that 20%, what sort of initiatives did you see that you felt worked really well?
Yeah. So, again, there's some items that I saw, like Choice Hotels. They, if you look at some of their midweek items in their loyalty program, big fan of what they did there. It was like $5 towards Dunkin' Donuts, $2.50 gift cards towards Starbucks. You had gas cards. I mean, these are things that are tangible value, right? Yeah. And immediate gratification, essentially. Yeah. Versus potentially even like a point system. How many consumers, unfortunately, even I'm in the hospitality industry, I don't even know like what one stay would equate to. How many stays do I need to get to a free night? Or and if you think about how popular cash back has become, I mean, Citi Cards has doubled down with their double cash back. Right. Capital One, like what's in your wallet, 1.5% cash back. I mean, people want to be able to, get money back in their hands rather quickly. I think you'll see a lot, I think you'll probably see a lot of change moving forward, but I think, the tangible items, the instant gratification, we've gotten accustomed to our Ubers and our Lyfts, right? Because nobody wants to sit there and wait for a taxi. Yeah. It's no different than anything else, DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever it is.
That is really interesting. A lot of people's focus on how's consumer behavior going to change. The conversations I've had and have witnessed, have all been around, are people going to feel safe going to the hotel? Are they going to care more about cleaning products? But actually, when it comes to that that moment of booking decision, things like cash back and using certain credit cards in order to get that cash back, the importance of those in a downturn, if we assume that this is a long, is just goes through the roof.
It is. And what you just mentioned about the cleaning, totally important. I'm actually in the process of piggybacking on a couple of items that were published in the last couple of weeks, just regarding, how important cleaning is going to become. There's a hotel nearby that actually, had a package. Nobody next to you in the 2 rooms next to you, nobody in front of you, and very specific in terms of their cleaning procedures. And I think the people that are willing to risk it, you have those early adopters essentially. Yeah. The people who kind of are going to wait to see if those people get sick. And we don't want those people to get sick by any means, so that other people will follow and be like, okay, it's safe, I can go out now.
Yeah. And of course, when hotels have low occupancy, it is not a massive additional cost or burden to say the room next to you will be empty. Like that should be quite an easy one for the next 3 months.
That's totally right. I mean, you've been hearing like people have closed entire hotels, but to the extent, if you need to keep the lights on, close a couple of floors. If you're going to be sitting at certain occupancy levels, what can you do to be a little bit creative, create some value, create the sense of security, the sense of cleanliness, for that potential guest.
That's interesting. And this was pre-COVID and less about the world's focus on hygiene and cleanliness, but with certain airlines, I know when I fly British Airways, if I fly in economy, they always, because I'm a loyalty member, because I go a lot, or used to travel a lot, I would always get an empty seat put next to me, and they'd block it out and no one can book it. And then I've seen on other airlines, like cheap carriers, where you can just pay extra. You pay for like a third of a seat and you get the seat blocked next to you. And they'll take it away. If the airplane did fill up, they'd say, sorry, it will be eventually taken, and then you get your money back. But the ability to say, I actually pay more to have fewer people around me. I've seen work in airlines, maybe it'll evolve. So we've gotten into some of the challenges today. So I'm fascinated to hear from your point of view, particularly given all the distribution relationships. I know that you every time we've spoken in the last few years, that's been your world, and how to manage OTAs and wholesalers better. So what now would if you're at Wyndham, or if you're another hotel group, or even an independent, how would you be thinking about those relationships, which ought to help get you out of this, but perhaps now is a moment to reassess them? How would you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I know, I don't want to say, it's a blessing and a curse, is how I'm looking at this. One, never in our history have we had a pause button in any industry, let alone the hospitality industry. But one of the things that I've been big on is making sure that you know who your partners are and how they are working with you, and if that's in your best interest. That hasn't changed. I think if anything, double down on that premise and see exactly what they're doing, and ask them exactly how they're selling your inventory. Because at the end of the day, you and I have had multiple conversations on wholesalers. You guys have published many different webinars and articles. But even to the extent OTAs, everybody is hurting right now. I think that first and foremost. So, from my distribution partnerships perspective, those distributors are going to do what they need to do to get the bookings. And that's just a fact, right? And nothing against them. That's what they do best, is convince consumers to book on their own travel sites. I think what I would do as a hotelier, independent or branded, is definitely take a look at the different partnerships. Is it a time to expand partnerships? Possibly, as long as you have the same interest and what that distributor is trying to do is in your best interest. And I think you're allowed to be selfish right now. You don't need to be partnering with anybody and everybody if you see that their behavior is not in your best interest as a hotelier.
Yeah.
So I would definitely, take a look at the incrementality of the business. Again, something that you and I have talked about time and time again. And I think, when push comes to shove right now, you'll see that a lot of the distributors are selling to the same people. So at that point in time, it's just a matter of economics. Who's going to get to that customer, and does it make sense to sell it through 10 different OTAs? Or do I consolidate to like a couple of OTAs that I know are not going to undercut me, to the extent I know that I can trust them with their inventory, that they're passing those rates as sell rates and not net rates, or whatever the case is. Because at the end of the day, I know that there's multiple conversations and opinions on direct bookings, and especially in a time right now, it is still the most profitable piece of business that's going to come into your hotel. And we know now more than ever, because of what happened with COVID, people are going to be more glued to their phones than they ever have been, pre-corona, essentially. And that property direct that we had been seeing that was declining by double digits, 10 to 15% every year, maybe that gets exacerbated and blows up exponentially. So does that go 20, 25% over the next couple of years? I don't know. Yeah. I could probably say, it'll definitely be faster growth from property direct to online channels. And then that basically means you're going against OTAs, which is the 300-pound gorilla, versus like, what are you going to put into your brand.com and your direct channels, and what does that value proposition look like?
And it's one thing if you are a huge, enormous group like Wyndham to look at the data of incrementality and things like that. I imagine if I'm an independent hotelier, and anyone walks through the door or gives me a call at this time and says, we're a wholesaler, we're another OTA, you haven't worked with us before, we'll bring you new people. you're taking it on faith, whether one, they're going to be incremental, and two, whether they're also going to be passing off your rates and undercutting you and things like that. So I'm trying to think, what, is it for those hotels? My guess is, if I was running an independent hotel, I'm just so desperate to fill rooms that I'm basically going to sign any contract someone puts in front of me.
Yeah, you have to be really careful. There's been a couple of distributors that are, offering guarantees and whatnot. If you get the cold hard cash in your hand, it's hard to walk away from that. But you can work with those on trust, right? I think that's one really important aspect as we come out of this is, who can you trust, and maybe going on faith a little bit, maybe being a little bit more restrictive of your inventory in the beginning and saying like, hey, I'm not going to give it to you within 7 days to booking, because I just don't want to afford to lose any direct share or, to have any headaches. But let's see what you can do outside of 7 days. Like if you're really a wholesaler and your typical model is 21 days out, or whatever the value premise is of that distributor, right? Like they're saying, oh, well, we're going to bring you more international. Okay, well, prove it to me. Most international travelers, book outside 21 days, and length of stay is at least 3 nights. If you can guarantee me that, and maybe they guaranteed, they're saying, hey, we'll give you $1 million, but give us all of your inventory. And you're like, no, give me $250,000 and keep it within this time period.
Yeah. And
then you build that trust. Yeah. Is not a bad way to go about it, and especially if you're a hotel that's hurting for revenues.
Yeah, and do you think we're going to be just, the world is a different place coming out of this, and the kinds of relationships and the amount that we'll pay different distributors or the way we work with them will be different? Do you have any expectations around like where it leads us to in the relationship? Yeah,
there was an article published, or I think Australia, I don't know if you saw it, was forcing Google and Facebook to share revenues.
Oh yes, yeah.
Which immediately I scratched my head. I'm like, can they do that? But I think you're definitely going to see some evolution. Things, things that have typically not been the norm. Hotels might start to look at that. A good example is like day use rates, right? Like there used to be a stigma on that. We've all been stuck in our homes for the better part of last it feels like 3 months, but I think it's only been like a month, maybe a month and a half for some people. And you see like Accor, you see Red Roof, starting to introduce some day rates on their direct channels and saying like, hey, if you want to get out of the house, you need a little bit of a break. Why don't you come to our nice clean room, get free coffee, free Wi-Fi, just take a break. Does that become more of the norm, and does the industry stigma around kind of what that product used to be known for kind of go away? I mean, I think hotels are going to start to look to different avenues and innovate more and revenue generating opportunities. That's just one example.
And do you think, and is there going to be much of a change, particularly I'm thinking about the big chains now, and I guess there might be some of the owners will end up sadly probably going out of business during this. Will there be a large shift coming then in the next year of properties being available and different flags changing?
I mean, having visibility and speaking to many different of my colleagues in many of the big brands, the unfortunate aspect is there's going to be hotels that are going to be impacted by this, either defaulting, bankruptcy, selling where they didn't want to sell. There were certain areas that were challenged, I guess is the best word to put it. So even in healthy times, they could barely have the lights running, the lights on and operations running. And I think, what you'll see out of this is some of those. I think there was an article that was published, Live Lodging or something along those lines, where many, franchisees were potentially upset with multiple different brands on how they approached. I think what it comes down to at the end of the day, being in a hotelier's shoes, and I do want to become a hotelier, especially an owner at one point, through my career. Profitability is the most important thing, right? And specifically cash flows. So if at the end of the day, whoever your partner is can't help you achieve that ultimate goal. And I think you're going to see, potentially, many properties deflag, go independent, I think.
And I suspect the exact opposite will also be true. There'll be a segment of hotels who were running independent and they found that hasn't worked, but they happen to be in the right segment or in the right catchment area or whatever, that they'd work really well as a brand, and
Absolutely.
Now they might make that move.
Yeah, no, I think there's going to be, it's going to be an interesting mix coming out of this. Over the last 3 years, what we had seen, what was discussed at Hotel Data Conference in the past, was more hotels moving to the independent model, right? I think there's been pressure on the OTAs to be a little bit more competitive there. We know that the OTAs do, when hotels are independent, they can do better, unless hotels, have good partnerships and good websites stood up and have a good sales team, put together, working with Triptease and similar companies like yourselves, to kind of help them through that. So I think it's really a matter of, the hotels, trusting and basing on faith in some of the results that some of the technology providers have come out. I'm really bullish on tech providers, and organizations such as Triptease and so on and so forth coming out of this, because I think, those hoteliers are going to need a helping hand, essentially, right? Yep. And that's kind of where the brand proposition has been in the past is, hey, we have operations folks that can help you on some of this. Yeah. Not that it might be your wheelhouse by any means or any other tech providers, but I think, there's a lot of smart people because of all the changes that have happened, for better or worse, like, people leaving, furloughed from Hilton, Marriott, Wyndham, Choice, everywhere. If some of these providers can tap into some of that expertise, whether they're operations folks or distribution or revenue management, there's a powerful proposition there. And even creating collaborative networks, working with OTA Insights, and OTA Insights has, somebody else as well. And maybe, there's partnerships created there. So I think, creating that value, you definitely will see some properties go from independent to brand, if they don't feel comfortable or whatever the case is, but then you also see brand going to independent. And I think if the industry, what we've seen over the last 5 years is that trend accelerating. I could see that happen, especially if the hotels are not profitable right now, and if that value proposition is not there.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Fascinating times ahead.
It is. It is. But I just think, coming out of this, you really have to keep an open mind, I think, is one thing. Like the bonds, the hotels selling vouchers and bonds, they did that in 2008. It's not a new concept by any means. But if you're stuck on cash flow, I mean, how many days, even events that are going to be out in the future, are you actually going to sell out? So at this point in time, focus on the cash flow, focus on your people, try to get as much money as you possibly can. And if your operations are still open, but then don't shy away from different things that may have worked for some people, in the past. And I think that's the most important thing that I can talk to, not only branded hotels, but also independent hoteliers. Okay.
So create offers and promotions, obviously, which are cancelable, that get you some money in the door now for events and for stays that you think might happen. We've seen in Asia, in some territories, that they are getting a lot of long range bookings. That's like in some countries, people are clearly feeling, you know what, I'll put in that vacation so I can look forward to it, or that trip in September, October, and I can always cancel it. And it's better to just get it shelved in there. And yeah,
I have two on the calendar already.
Really? Wow. Okay.
I have DC in August and I have Orlando in October. So,
right. And with flight and with hotel, you both thought they're both cancelable if I need to. So I'll put them in.
That's right.
And the best rate you ever got?
The best rate I ever got. So the best savings I ever got was a past trip, which was about 50% off in Santorini, and right. It was for a honeymoon suite. It wasn't our honeymoon, but we just saw it was 50% off, so we were like, that's a pretty good deal. For this trip, I want to say it was about 40% off.
Right.
The typical rate for Orlando.
Right.
So you can't beat that, and we know the area well. It's only 2.5 hours for our son, which when you're traveling with kids, the lower the time, in terms of flight, the better.
Wow. We should get booking.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think we'll come out of this, but again, it's creating that value proposition. Knowing the different providers, and I think that's going to be the most important aspect coming out of this.
We could have been 2 hours on this one. I know there's so much more detail we go into. So maybe we talk again in the future. But thank you and good luck during this. Keep safe, keep the family safe. And I'm delighted to hear that you're already booking future stays. That's great.
All right, Charlie.
Bye.
Take care.